My daughter texted me, "You are not invited to the housewarming party. My husband doesn't want you there." This was after I fully paid for their house. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I made sure they regretted everything they did. Let me tell you how everything unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jamie Atkins from New Jersey. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. People always told me I was too generous with my daughter. "You spoil her," they'd say. But when you've raised a child alone, when you've worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on and their belly full, spoiling them doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like redemption. My name is Janice Hall. I've spent most of my life working in education administration, budgeting not just school programs, but my own pennies, one at a time. Emily was my only child, and after her father left us when she was just 4, I swore I'd give her a life that didn't feel like one long apology. From the moment she was born, I was in motion. Diapers, daycare, late-night lesson plans for extra pay, side gigs tutoring other people's kids just to keep mine in ballet and braces. I never remarried. I told myself it was because I hadn't found the right person, but deep down, I just didn't want to share Emily. She was my world, and I was building hers, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I paid for her college outright. When she wanted to study abroad for a semester in Florence, I quietly took a second mortgage. She never knew that part. She only saw the plane ticket, the opportunity. And that's what I wanted. When she met David, I had reservations. He was polite enough, handsome in that generic, Instagram-filtered way. But something in his eyes always looked like he was sizing you up. Not mean, just calculating. I tried to ignore it. He was good to her in the beginning, or at least, that's what I chose to see. He sent thank you texts when I paid for their engagement dinner. He smiled through tight teeth during family photos. But after the wedding, things shifted. Suddenly, I was overstepping. Suddenly, Emily wasn't calling back as quickly. Little boundaries started sprouting up like weeds in a garden I thought I had nurtured. The house conversation came 6 months into their marriage. Emily called, voice bubbling with excitement, saying they found a place. A 2-story colonial on the edge of town, fixer-upper, but perfect for starting a family. I smiled through the phone. Of course I would help. I had saved for years, ever since she was a teenager. Not for this specifically, but for whatever she needed to feel secure. I transferred the full down payment without hesitation. And when she told me the mortgage was too high, I paid that too. I didn't want her to struggle like I had. I insisted we go through my lawyer to handle the paperwork. Just a precaution, I said, in case anything happens. She didn't blink. David didn't either. They just signed where the tabs were. Tucked within the legalese was a clause, something my lawyer called a protective ownership reversion. It stated that under certain conditions, namely family conflict or financial misuse, I had the right to reclaim ownership of the home. At the time, it felt paranoid, even to me. But a quiet voice in my head whispered, "Protect yourself." And for once, I listened. The day they moved in, I was there at 7 a.m. with coffee and donuts. I helped unpack boxes, hung curtains, even scrubbed the kitchen floor while Emily rearranged furniture and David directed movers like a CEO. I smiled through the aches in my knees, ignoring the way David barely acknowledged me. When I brought over a ceramic planter I'd had since Emily was a baby, he said, "Do we really want old stuff cluttering the porch?" Emily shushed him with a laugh. I swallowed mine with the rest of my pride. The next few months were quiet. Emily called, but less frequently. I'd drop off groceries once in a while, or come by when they were out to water the plants. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds need space. I convinced myself I was doing too much. Maybe I was overbearing. I'd always been a fixer, but it's hard to turn off decades of mothering. It's not like a light switch. It's a rhythm, a heartbeat. Then came the text. It was a Saturday morning. I was sitting in the sunroom, drinking tea and flipping through the local paper. My phone buzzed once. I picked it up and read the message without expecting anything unusual. But the words sliced through me like cold steel. "You are not invited to the housewarming party. My husband doesn't want you there." No greeting. No explanation. Just that. My tea turned cold in my hands. I read it again and again. My mind didn't know how to process betrayal wrapped in such clinical brevity. I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears. I waited for another text, an apology, a clarification. None came. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every sacrifice I had made for Emily, wondering where I had gone wrong. Was it that I gave too much? That I never asked for anything back? That I let her marry a man who saw me as a checkbook with a heartbeat? I thought about the house, how I had never even asked to be thanked for it. I had wanted to give her stability, a legacy, but now all I felt was used. By morning, I wasn't angry. I was clear. The kind of clarity that comes not from rage, but from resolve. I walked to my desk, pulled out the manila folder with the house papers, and dialed my lawyer's number. When she picked up, her voice was calm, familiar. She listened without judgment as I asked, "Is the clause still valid?" She said yes. And just like that, I began the process of reclaiming what was mine. I must have stared at that text 100 times. It felt like a punch, not to the gut, but somewhere more sacred, somewhere no apology could reach. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the precision, the blunt, surgical cruelty of them. "You are not invited to the housewarming party. My husband doesn't want you there." 10 words. 10 words that dismantled 30 years of motherhood. The phrasing was unmistakable, calculated, final. Emily didn't say we, didn't cushion it with maybe next time, didn't offer to talk it through. She passed the blame to him, sure, but still hit send. She still chose him over me. And that changed everything. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, as if the message would morph into something else if I looked at it long enough. Maybe I misread it. Maybe it was a joke. But no, it was too deliberate. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't reply. What would I say? Why not? What did I do? Is this really from you? No. If she wanted to explain, she would have. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't just excluded from a party, I was being phased out of her life. Strategically, quietly, with David at the helm and Emily holding the door. The worst part wasn't even the message itself. It was the memories that rushed in like a tide. I thought about the baby shower I threw her, how I handmade every decoration. I thought about the countless dinners she didn't invite me to once she got married. The birthdays celebrated, just the two of us. And I remembered the first time David rolled his eyes at me across the table, how Emily laughed it off like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I had buried these moments, convinced myself they weren't worth making a fuss over. But now, stacked together, they told a different story. One where I was the unwanted extra, the family she outgrew. I didn't cry that day. I wish I could say I did, but I was too stunned. Numbness took its place. I spent the next few hours in a fog, moving through my house like a visitor in my own life. I tried washing dishes, folding laundry, anything to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But everything felt off. Every surface I touched reminded me of Emily. Every photo on the wall felt like a lie. I looked at her graduation picture, cap crooked, smile wide, and I wondered where that girl had gone. I wondered what David had said about me behind closed doors to make her think this was okay. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did. I sat in the dining room and let the silence envelop me. My thoughts grew louder in its absence. I imagined the party, laughing, music, people clinking glasses in a home I paid for. My daughter showing off granite countertops I'd chosen, floors I'd refinished, furniture I'd helped fund. I imagined her smiling while people complimented the space, never once mentioning the woman who made it possible. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. And in that silence, something shifted. I remembered the clause, the one I had insisted on with a knot in my gut, and a lawyer who raised one brow but said nothing. "Are you sure you want to include that?" she had asked. "It's a bit unorthodox." I was. I told her I had my reasons. Back then, I thought I was just being protective. I didn't think I'd ever use it. But that night, sitting in my own dining room like a ghost, I realized it wasn't just a clause. It was a lifeline, a way to remind them, and myself, of who built that house, of who had always been there. I pulled out the documents from my filing cabinet. The envelope was thick, crisp, untouched since the day I signed it. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. I read every page slowly, highlighting the key section, the one that gave me authority to revert ownership due to moral breach and familial disassociation. Legal jargon, but powerful. I had a copy of the deed, the terms, everything. My lawyer had ensured it. I didn't need to consult anyone. It was already in motion the moment Emily sent that text. The next morning, I called Sharon, my lawyer and, at this point, one of the few people I still trusted. Activated. I told her, I'm done. There was a pause on the line. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She had known me for years. She'd seen me raise Emily alone, sit through hospital visits with her, drive across counties to get her to scholarship interviews. She knew what this decision cost me. And still, she simply said, okay, I'll file the paperwork today. By noon, it was official. The clause had been triggered. Ownership of the house was legally reverted back to me. A locksmith met me that afternoon. I didn't pack up their things. I didn't touch their personal items. I simply changed the locks and left a legal notice taped to the door, explaining the terms. No malice. No drama. Just finality. Emily called later that night. 5 missed calls. Then a voicemail. Her voice was panicked, breathless. Mom, what are you doing? Please don't do this. We can talk. I didn't mean what I said. David didn't. He was just upset. Please call me back. I didn't. I lay in bed listening to that message on loop, not because I was considering calling her, but because I wanted to memorize the moment she realized what she'd lost. Not the house. Me. The next day, she came to the house, pounded on the door, cried, begged, but I stayed inside. She had made her choice. I had made mine, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight start to lift. The morning after I changed the locks, I woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that makes you exhale and feel grateful for stillness. No, this was a charged, tense quiet, like the calm that hovers before a storm shatters the sky. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee going cold beside me, staring at my phone like it might explode. Emily hadn't called again after the night before. Not yet. But I could feel the tension in the air, like static before a lightning strike. I imagined her waking up, realizing she couldn't get into her house, rereading the legal notice with trembling hands. I wondered what David said when he saw it. I wondered if he cursed my name, or if he finally realized who he'd been dealing with. I didn't feel triumphant. That's what people don't understand. Reclaiming something that should never have been taken isn't a victory, it's a last resort. I had gone to bed exhausted, not from the logistics, but from the heartbreak. The kind that doesn't scream or weep, but settles deep into your bones and makes your limbs heavy. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And when that was too much to ask for, I wanted space, clean, unambiguous space between me and the people who had turned me into a footnote in their lives. By mid-morning, Sharon called to confirm the clause had been officially processed and recorded. Her voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the empathy underneath. You know, they might challenge this, she said. Public opinion, if not legal grounds. I told her I wasn't worried about public opinion. I hadn't lived my life for other people's approval, and I wasn't about to start now. She paused for a moment, then added, You're stronger than most. Just make sure you're ready for the fallout. I told her I already lived in it. I spent the rest of the day moving around the house like someone trying to remember which drawers held what. I hadn't touched most of their things, my name was on the deed now, but I still felt like I was walking through someone else's life. Their photos were still on the walls, their mismatched mugs still in the cupboard. I didn't touch the fridge, where Emily had hung a grocery list in her handwriting, half-formed loops and quick scribbles. Eggs, oat milk, spinach, granola. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I carefully peeled it off and dropped it in the trash. Late in the afternoon, I opened the front door to let in fresh air. That's when I saw her car parked just down the block. Not in the driveway, not in front of the house, but far enough away to say, I'm here, but I won't come unless you do first. That had always been Emily's way. Silent negotiations. Emotional chess. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before turning back inside. If she wanted to talk, she could walk to the door. She never did. By evening, the text messages began again. This time, they were longer. Emotional. I don't understand why you're doing this. You're punishing me for one mistake. David was upset, and took it out on you. That's not fair, but this isn't either. I read each one with a strange detachment, like they were addressed to someone else. She wanted to talk now. She wanted to clarify, to make things right. But only after her security had been taken, only after the locks were changed and the house, her house, as she called it, was gone. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had called me overbearing, too involved, always inserting herself. But the second I stepped back, no, the second I enforced my boundary, I became cruel, spiteful, unforgiving. I was the villain in a story they had been writing behind my back for months, maybe years. And now that I had rewritten the ending, they were crying foul. I didn't respond to the texts. I needed space, not apologies born of desperation. I needed time to reclaim not just the house, but the parts of myself I had whittled down for their comfort. My motherhood had become a service I kept performing, long after the curtain should have closed. I had paid for that house not because I wanted control, but because I believed I was investing in her future. I believed she'd want me in it. But that was the lie. The truth was, I had been funding my own replacement. That night, I walked from room to room, making small but deliberate changes. I removed the throw pillows that spelled "Love Lives Here." I boxed up their framed wedding photo on the mantel. I peeled off the "Home Sweet Home" decal from the wall above the kitchen sink. It came off in thin, jagged strips, resistant, like it didn't want to let go. But I kept pulling, one letter at a time, until all that remained was bare, quiet wall. I found an old album of mine in the back closet. Photos of Emily as a baby, drawings she made in second grade, a crayon card that read, "You're the best mom ever," in crooked handwriting. I sat on the floor and flipped through it, page by page. My throat tightened. It wasn't that she didn't love me anymore. It was that she didn't know how to love me as a whole person, only as a provider, a fixer, someone to smooth out life's wrinkles until she and David didn't need me anymore. And once they didn't need me, they discarded me. They never expected I'd need anything in return. So I sat there, in the home I reclaimed not out of vengeance, but out of clarity, and I made a decision. This wasn't just about property. This was about identity. About a mother who gave everything and finally realized she had nothing left to give. No more begging for access to my daughter's life. No more invitations I'd have to earn. No more pretending I was welcome where I clearly wasn't. I was done. It was 3 days before she showed up in person again. Not with the fury I'd half expected, not with lawyers or threats or some dramatic confrontation. She came alone, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing that oversized gray hoodie she used to wear in high school when she was too tired or too overwhelmed to care. The irony didn't escape me that even in adulthood, when her world fell apart, she came wrapped in the same old armor. I saw her through the front window first, just standing there on the porch, hands stuffed in her sleeves like a child asking for mercy. I didn't move right away. I just watched. She knocked, lightly, uncertain. A tentative rhythm, the kind of knock that says, "Please don't be angry." I opened the door, not because I had softened, but because I needed to see her face. To know if she even recognized the gravity of what she'd done. Her eyes were swollen, red. No makeup. Her voice cracked before she said a word. "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside. Didn't say yes. Didn't say no. Just let her in. She stood just inside the doorway, glancing around like everything was unfamiliar. As if the house had changed without her. Or maybe it was her who had changed, and now, the walls she once called home were just too honest. She followed me into the living room, where I sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. She didn't sit at first. She stood across from me, shifting from foot to foot like her body couldn't find rest. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she started. Her voice was quiet, but the words were rehearsed. "David was angry. We were stressed. The party was already a lot, and he felt like you were," she hesitated. "He felt like you were trying to control things again. And instead of talking to you, he just sent the message." I nodded slowly, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. I waited, watching her scramble to rebuild the bridge she'd helped burn. "I didn't even see it before he sent it," she added, more urgently now. "I wouldn't have let him word it like that. I would have, Mom. I didn't know it would hurt you like this." I looked at her, dead in the eyes. "You didn't know it would hurt me?" She flinched. I didn't mean. Of course I knew it would sting, but I didn't think I'd react. I cut in. Didn't think I'd finally stop pretending I was okay being used? Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down. You always do so much, she said. You just jump in. You take over. And David feels like it's not really our life sometimes. Like you're still in the middle of it all. I let out a dry laugh. You mean I pay for everything, but I'm supposed to stay invisible? No, she said quickly, stepping closer. That's not what I meant. He wanted to do things his way. He wanted to feel like a man, like he had control, and I didn't know how to balance it. You had no problem letting me pay for the house, I said sharply. No problem signing the paperwork. No problem shopping with my money, furnishing rooms I'd never be invited to. But suddenly I'm too involved. She sat then, slowly, on the edge of the coffee table like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. I made a mistake, she whispered. I should have stood up to him. I should have told him no. I should have. You shouldn't have let him speak for us, I said. There is no marriage strong enough to justify betraying your mother like that. Not when your mother built the foundation you're standing on. Tears started to roll down her cheeks, and for a moment, I almost reached for her. Almost. But something held me back. Something stronger than maternal instinct. Self-preservation. Survival. I had poured so much of myself into her life that I'd forgotten what it felt like to hold anything back. Now I was learning. Slowly. Painfully. But I was learning. I just wanted us all to be okay, she said between sobs. I didn't want to choose between my husband and my mom. I didn't think I'd have to. You didn't have to, I replied. You chose to. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that speaks louder than screams. She wiped her face with her sleeve, her shoulders trembling. I could see the little girl in her then, the one who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare, the one who cried when I missed a recital because I was stuck at work. She had always needed me, and I had always shown up. But that girl was gone now, and the woman in front of me had let someone else redefine what loyalty looked like. Finally, she looked up. Can we fix this? I didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air like a balloon with no string, hopeful, but directionless. I don't know, I said. I'm not saying I'll never speak to you again. I'm not shutting the door forever. But right now, I need distance. I need to remember who I am when I'm not being used. I need time to live in this house without feeling like a fool in her own story. She nodded slowly, more devastated by my calm than she would have been by rage. I'll go, she said, voice cracking again. I'm sorry. I let her walk out without a hug, without a promise, without a resolution. Sometimes people confuse forgiveness with reunion, but I knew better now. Forgiveness was about setting down the weight, not inviting it back in. As the door closed behind her, I exhaled. One chapter had ended, and no matter how many tears were shed, I wasn't reopening it. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Families are porous things. No matter how tightly you try to seal the cracks, word seeps out like water through old pipes. My sister called first. Brenda. Always the peacemaker, the one who thought love meant smoothing things over until the truth disappeared. She didn't start with a hello. She dove right in. Janice, what the hell is going on? Emily says you took the house. I closed my eyes. Of course, Emily had called her. No, I said quietly. I reclaimed the house. I owned it. I paid for it. I just decided I wasn't going to keep funding my own disrespect. Brenda sighed, one of those long, performative exhales that meant you're making things harder than they have to be. You didn't have to go this far. She told me I wasn't invited to the housewarming because her husband didn't want me there. Silence. Then, still, she's your daughter. I know exactly who she is, I said, my voice calm. I just don't like what she's become. That ended the call. Not with a fight. Just a soft click, the kind that meant we'll revisit this later, even though we both knew we wouldn't. A few days later, my niece tagged me in an Instagram post, accidentally, I assume. I clicked out of instinct, and there it was. A photo of Emily and David standing in front of a different house, smaller, less polished, clearly temporary. The caption read, "Sometimes family isn't who raises you, it's who respects you." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments, most of them some version of "so proud of you for setting boundaries." and toxic people don't belong in your new chapter. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the usual rush of hot anger. I felt cold, distant, like I was watching a stranger imitate my daughter. I stared at her face in the photo, smiling, makeup perfect, arms wrapped around the man who had slowly, quietly pushed me out of her life. That post wasn't a cry for help. It was a performance. A way to control the narrative. To frame herself as the victim. And me? I was the villain. The overbearing mother who couldn't let go. Let go? I thought. I'd been holding on for her entire life. Holding the weight, the bills, the dreams. I'd held on through tantrums, through breakups, through every self-inflicted mess she begged me to clean. Letting go was the first honest thing I'd done. The backlash wasn't just online. I started getting cold shoulders at church. Mrs. Devlin from choir walked past me without a word. One of the mothers I used to babysit for asked, "Is it true you kicked your daughter out of her own house?" And behind every question, behind every stare, was the same quiet accusation. You're not supposed to do that. Mothers are supposed to forgive. Always. But what no one saw was the years of slow erosion. The birthdays skipped without notice. The holidays where I cooked for two but ate alone. The way David would subtly undermine me in conversation. "Oh, Emily told me you were always a bit overbearing," said with a smirk that dared me to argue. I had swallowed so much for the sake of peace that I no longer recognized the taste of my own dignity. And Emily had let it happen. Again and again. Until one day, she stopped calling me mom and started calling me her. As in, she's just too much sometimes. Or her opinion doesn't count here. And each time she did, I said nothing. Because silence is what mothers are taught to offer in exchange for proximity. But silence had made me invisible. So no, I didn't kick her out. I simply stopped pretending that being a mother meant being a doormat. It wasn't all bad, though. There were a few quiet allies. My neighbor, Mrs. Grant, brought over muffins and said, "Good for you, Janice." Sometimes drawing a line is the only way they learn. And my friend Carla from work emailed, "My son hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. I wish I'd done what you did when I had the chance." Even in solidarity, though, I felt alone. This kind of pain doesn't invite celebration. There's no joy in choosing yourself when it means closing the door on your child. Just necessity. Just survival. One evening, I stood in what used to be Emily's bedroom. The bed was stripped bare, the closet empty except for a broken hanger. I don't know why I went in there. Maybe to remind myself of the full arc. How once I had sat on that very bed reading Goodnight Moon to a toddler who couldn't fall asleep without hearing my voice. How the same room now echoed with nothing but dust and memory. I stood there a long time, just breathing, letting it all wash over me. I wasn't grieving the house or the lost connection. I was grieving the illusion that if I just loved hard enough, they'd never leave. Love doesn't guarantee loyalty. That's the hard truth. And loyalty isn't owed where love is weaponized. Later that night, I received one final message from Emily. No apology this time. No tears. Just, "I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything." And I finally responded, "No, Emily. You ruined everything when you stopped seeing me as a person. I'm not your villain. I'm just finally choosing peace over proximity." I hit send and blocked her number. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Out of the need to breathe. And for the first time in decades, the air around me felt clean. It's strange, the way peace arrives not like fireworks or fanfare, but like a slow sunrise through fog. It doesn't announce itself. It just begins to feel less heavy to wake up in the morning. It becomes a little easier to exhale. It took weeks, maybe months, but eventually the sharp edges of everything softened. The anger dulled. The ache muted. What remained was something quieter, something sturdier, resolve. My house, once a monument to sacrifice and betrayal, began to feel like mine again. Room by room, I reclaimed it, not just legally, but spiritually. I painted the walls. I bought a new couch in a deep navy blue, the kind I'd always wanted but never bought because it clashed with Emily's aesthetic. I filled the space with books, with soft rugs and thrifted lamps, with the smell of lemon candles. For the first time in decades, my home reflected me. Not what she wanted. Not what he dictated. Me. People still talk, of course. Whispers have long tails in small towns. Some say I was cruel. Others say I was brave. Most just say they don't understand. And that's fine. I'm not interested in being understood by those who think motherhood is a lifetime sentence of martyrdom. I lived that role for far too long. Always bending, always breaking, always apologizing just to keep a seat at the table. But here's the truth they don't want to hear. Love doesn't mean forfeiting self-respect. It doesn't mean enduring unkindness under the banner of family. And boundaries? Boundaries are not cruelty. They're clarity. I started going to the park again in the mornings. I bring a thermos of coffee and sit by the lake with my journal. Sometimes, I write letters I'll never send. To Emily. To my younger self. To the version of me that thought love had to hurt to be real. I write not to forgive her, necessarily, but to remind myself that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting the bitterness out. She still hasn't tried to contact me since that last message. And I haven't reached out either. I deleted her number. I removed her photo from my bedside table. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Every reminder felt like reopening a wound that was just beginning to scab over. One Saturday afternoon, while I was weeding the garden, Brenda pulled up in her silver Honda. She stood awkwardly at the edge of the driveway, hands on hips, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded for her to come closer. She didn't say much at first. Just looked at the house, at the freshly planted roses, at the wind chimes on the porch. "It looks nice," she finally said. "Thanks," I replied. She hesitated. "I talked to Emily last week." I didn't respond. Just pulled another weed. "She's still upset." "I imagine she is," I said. "She thinks you hate her." I stood up then, slowly. Looked Brenda square in the eye. "I don't hate her. I love her. But I won't be manipulated by her again. That's not love. That's survival." Brenda nodded, slowly. "You really done?" I looked at the garden, at the new life growing from fresh soil. I'm done enabling her. If she wants to grow into someone better, I'm open to knowing that version of her. But until then, I'm done. Brenda didn't push further. Just nodded and got back in her car. She understood more than she let on. Maybe she had her own regrets, her own silences that had cost her peace. As the seasons changed, so did I. I started saying yes to things I used to ignore: book clubs, yoga, weekend trips with Carla and her sister. I started saying no to guilt. No to last-minute emotional demands. No to being the villain in someone else's story just because I finally prioritized myself. I didn't feel like a bad mother anymore. I felt like a woman who had finally come home to herself. Sometimes, at night, I still wonder what Emily is doing. I wonder if she ever looks at the house she lost and realizes it wasn't just a property, it was a relationship, a trust, a foundation that took decades to build and only 10 words to shatter. I wonder if she'll ever understand that the text wasn't just rude, it was a declaration, a clear sign that I had become expendable in her new life. And if she regrets it, she hasn't said. Maybe she will one day. Or maybe she's convinced herself I was always the problem. Either way, it's not mine to fix. And that's what peace looks like, really. Letting go of the need to be seen as right. Letting go of the urge to correct the narrative. Letting go of the hope that someone else will wake up and suddenly become the person you need them to be. Peace is accepting what is, instead of clinging to what could have been. The final change I made was to the front of the house. I bought a new welcome mat. Nothing fancy, just a clean, simple one that says, "Come as you are." A reminder to myself, more than to visitors. Come as you are, but only if who you are doesn't cost me my peace. Because I've paid enough. I've given enough. And from now on, I choose me. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We release new emotionally gripping family dramas every week, stories about betrayal, boundaries, and the strength it takes to choose yourself. Stay tuned for more raw, real-life narratives that speak to the heart. See you soon in the next story.